Chapter 24. 20 minutes later, with the end of the tape just finishing, Gwendraeth James's BMW pulled up the gravel drive in front of Plas Wern Las. The car looked smooth enough against the elegance of the house, which seems to stand out against the surrounding wetness. "I wish you'd told me before, Chief." Harry Warden spoke as the tape stopped and Gwendraeth prepared to get out of the car. "Oh no, let's talk about it later." Harry Warden knew better than to push it when Gwendraeth James was in that kind of mood. "Quite a place, this, even in the rain," he said, changing the subject. Harry Warden's remarks almost echoed Gwendraeth's own thoughts as they made for the half-open front door. He was glad of the distraction. He knew that he was going to have his visit his uncle again, and he wasn't looking forward to it. The disquieting weight of the past seemed worse in the rain, and he was glad of a distraction. Politely enough, given the circumstances, Gwendraeth lifted the heavy brass knocker and banged it twice. There was no reply. Not waiting long because of the rain, Gwendraeth led the way down the tiled hallway, followed by Harry Warden. They tried not to leave wet footprints behind them, but it was impossible. There was no one about. Without even looking at Gwendraeth, Harry Warden made for the old drawing room on the right-hand side. Except for a pile of tatami mats under the window, the room was virtually empty. Even though there was nothing definite to indicate the horror of 50 years ago, the architectural features now seemed full of foreboding, Gwendraeth thought. There was a gaunt, unpainted elegance to the large room. Repaired patches of plaster seemed obvious in the grey afternoon light. There was no warmth. The fireplace was empty. There weren't even any logs stacked next to it. Once you knew what had happened, the whole place seemed to contain a persistent atmosphere. "This is the place?" Harry Warden asked. "Where they found her?" Gwendraeth nodded in reply. Unusually for him, he still didn't feel like speaking. Hearing his uncle's tape again, revisiting Plas Wern Las, made him feel as if the past was a weight. Today, he thought, he could feel it in his bones. He felt tired. "We'd better get a move on, Chief. Find someone." Gwendraeth nodded again. Language seemed inadequate to convey his sense that a pattern 50 years old, perhaps even older than that, was being worked out. In the upstairs rooms, for example, the ones currently used to house weekend retreats, he now knew that Henrietta's sister had sat after the murder, being comforted by that visiting American poet. And then his own Uncle Edward had come, young, uncertain, inexperienced. What the hell had he known about anything? "Chief!" Harry Warden's voice jogged him back into the present, and Gwendraeth followed his sergeant out of the drawing room and down the corridor to the kitchen. There they found Queenie, the woman with the facial tattoos. Gwendraeth recognized her immediately. "So you're back, are you?" Queenie Rogers said immediately as they came into the room. She was scrubbing the large table in the centre. "Sniffing around again?" "Might want CID," Gwendraeth said, showing his ID. "I know who you are. Showed me last time, if you remember," Queenie continued. Her tone wasn't particularly friendly. "I'd recognise that head of hair anywhere." "We're looking for Martin James," Gwendraeth said, ignoring her last remark. "Who isn't?" Queenie Rogers stopped scrubbing and looked up at Gwendraeth. She obviously wasn't intimidated by his presence. "You mean you haven't seen him?" Harry Warden moved closer to the tattooed woman. Queenie held her ground. "I haven't seen no one all day, have I? Most of them buggered off after breakfast, with some tantric exhibition in Carmarthen. It's a new gallery. You didn't want to go? No. I'd rather stay home and scrub tables, I would. Do I look tantric to you? Wasn't a question he could easily answer, Gwendraeth thought, so he didn't bother. Of course, I would have liked to have gone, but someone's got to be here to look after the place, haven't they? Martin James, Harry Warden asked. Did he go with them? Don't think so. Land Rover's still here. I noticed it when I went to feed the chickens. He'd be in the apple house, most probably. That's a long, low, white building in the yard. Go right through the house, turn left. You can't miss it, if you've got eyes. Gwendraeth followed Queenie Rogers' directions and soon found himself outside again. The rain had stopped for a moment, giving way to a soft greyness. The yard, with a series of flanking stone outbuildings, seemed to wait in the wet. Sure enough, as Queenie had predicted, there was an old green Land Rover parked on the gravel. Gwendraeth turned left, towards the long, low, whitewashed building which he thought must be the apple house. Harry Warden followed him. There was a black painted door, but it was shut, and no one answered when he knocked. After a moment, Gwendraeth went over to a window on the right and looked in. It was a small whitewashed room with a wood stove and a table. In the centre of the room was a bed, and in the middle of the bed were two figures covered with a sheet. One of them looked up as Gwendraeth peered through the window. It was Martin James. The other one, the woman, tried to pull the sheet across to cover her breasts. She had long curly black hair, which came out in a frizz from a centre parting. He thought it must be Samantha Merriam. "What's up, Chief?" Harry Warden said, as Gwendraeth backed away from the window. "You've interrupted something." "Anything serious?" "Depends on your point of view. I just saw Martin James in bed with Samantha Merriam." "Never. Never mind, never, Warden. You're not his mother." "You met hers, though, didn't you? You went to London." "What's that got to do with anything?" Harry Warden looked thoughtful for a moment. "Just something to say, isn't it? To cover your embarrassment." "I'm not embarrassed." "No?" "No, but I hope he is." Some moments later, the door to the apple house opened, and a tousled Martin James, wearing jeans and a sweater and pulling on his shoes, appeared. He said, "So you don't believe in privacy, Gwendraeth?" "I knocked." "You knocked, but you didn't wait." "Might want CID, Harry Warden said, holding up his ID. "I know that, Sergeant," Martin James said. "That's obvious. I know Gwendraeth." "You're the one he went to school with," Harry Warden said. It wasn't a question. "So what do you want?" Martin James' expression didn't give anything away. "We need to talk about the shooting. Can we come in?" "Samantha's not ready. We can wait," Gwendraeth James said. He meant it. Just then, drops of rain began to fall, and Harry Warden turned up his collar and began to shift around. He was about to say something when Martin James beat him to it. "I don't suppose I have much choice, do I?" Then he turned back to the apple house. "Everything all right, Sam?" There was a muffled reply, and then Martin James went back into the apple house, and Gwendraeth and Harry Warden followed. Samantha Merriam sat on the bed and glowered at Gwendraeth. She was wearing jeans and a check shirt and no shoes. As he stepped into the confined space, she said, "And I was under the illusion you were a gentleman." "We do try and be polite, miss," Harry Warden commented. "There's no need to miss me, Sergeant." "Not after what you've just done." "Sorry if I've interrupted anything," Gwendraeth said, "but I do need to talk to Martin." "Tact was never your strong point, was it, Gwendraeth?" Martin James said. "Never mind about that now," Gwendraeth James said. "This is not about St. Hilda's. This is about a shooting on Saturday afternoon, at which you were present." "You didn't tell me," Samantha Merriam said to Martin James. She looked surprised. I didn't want to worry you. I can't be protected from everything just because my father's dead. I'd appreciate it if you could learn that. Samantha Merriam pulled on her shoes and then stood up. She began to move past Gwendraeth as Martin James looked at Harry Warden, who stood in front of the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, she said. I don't think I'm the one you want to talk to this time. Harry Warden looked questioningly at Gwendraeth, who waved his hand as an indication that he should let her go. Then Harry Warden moved aside, and Samantha Merriam left the apple house without saying anything more. You probably should have told her, Gwendraeth said to Martin James. Don't tell me what to do. Gwendraeth tried his best to get past the years of schoolboy rivalry. He genuinely liked Samantha Merriam. Her recent entanglement with Martin James didn't affect that. She might be concerned. It could have been you. Keep out of my affairs, Gwendraeth, Martin James said. Gwendraeth tried to control himself. Can't do that. Sorry. There's a slight matter of one murder, perhaps an attempt at another one. That's not my fault, is it? We're not talking about fault. We're talking about facts. You might not like it, but you're going to have to get used to it. Martin James took a breath. I didn't even see anything, he said. It was a sort of crack. Didn't even know it was a shot. And there he was, clutching his arm. You're sure? Why would I lie, Gwendraeth? There was a moment when Gwendraeth wanted to break over the reserve that lay between them. His years of experience of a detective told him there was any number of reasons why Martin James might be concealing the truth. Love, lust, money being the principal contenders. But he backed off from an immediate confrontation. He suspected there was a long way to go in this investigation. He didn't want to blow it yet. That might be difficult for me to answer, he said. I don't follow. Gwendraeth looked closely at Martin James, who now stood facing him in the cramped space. He was slightly taller than Gwendraeth remembered. Taller and thinner and older, and perhaps more determined. His forehead was creased above his left eye, and there was a worried look Gwendraeth hadn't seen before. Understanding you and your deeper motivation might be tricky, he said. What's there to understand? Martin James said. There was a shot. We don't know who is responsible. Gwendraeth noticed there was a denim jacket and a pair of blue socks left on the bed. Obviously both belonged to Samantha Merriam. He couldn't help wondering what had brought her together with Martin James. Despite the evidence to the contrary, to him it seemed an unlikely combination. Is there anyone who might have had a grudge against you? Harry Warden said. Why did you need to see Merlin Griffiths in the first place? There was a pause. Martin James looked coolly enough at both of them. They'd given him a chance to evade them, and he took it. Which question do you want me to answer first? No one said anything for a moment. Gwendraeth waited. He knew that his chances of getting a direct answer were now diminished. But he knew also that something had to emerge. I needed to see Merlin Griffiths because of questions arising from my Aunt Henrietta's death, if you must know. And the more I learn about it, the more suspicious I become. And? Why would anyone butcher her so brutally? Martin James asked no one in particular. And why would someone force a perfectly innocent man to drive a car into a gully? You're saying the two deaths are connected, despite the fact that they're 50 years apart. Why would you think that exactly? Martin James pulled out the small Windsor chair that was tucked into the corner by the wood stove, and he sat down on it. He brushed his hair away from his eyes, and then he said, I don't have exact proof. I'm not the police. What I have, if you like, is a sense of creeping unease. That somewhere, yes, in a way I don't yet understand, Parker Merriam's death is connected with my aunt's. The layers interweave, whether you believe it or not. He looked directly at Gwendraeth. 50 years ago, my aunt dies in horrible circumstances. My side of the family inherits a wonderful house with a blight. On the other side, my second cousin, Wyndham Spencer James, wants possession of Plas Wern Las, if he can get his hands on it. Then it turns out Parker Merriam is linked with him in a way I don't like. In the middle of all this, the solicitor who I'm beginning to trust gets shot. If I'm starting to get a little jumpy, I don't think I can be blamed exactly, can I? So you're sure you didn't see anyone from the coracle? Martin James shook his head. Gwendraeth then turned towards Harry Warden and indicated that they should leave. He ignored the questioning look in his sergeant's face and moved towards the door. He left Martin James staring into space in the small room, which by this time had become oppressive. He had to get away. Make his own patterns. When he got outside again, there was a welcome drizzle in the grey farmyard. There were dark clouds overhead. He began to walk towards the car, and he didn't wait for Harry Warden to catch up with him. You didn't tell him about your uncle? About the tape? Gwendraeth James was driving too fast along the narrow, winding road that led away from Plas Wern Las. Spurts of water leapt up from where the drainage alongside the road wasn't working properly. He didn't care. He hadn't even bothered to turn the demister on, and it was getting damper inside the car. No. Why not? Because it's none of his business. It's about the death of his aunt, isn't it? All that stuff your uncle was involved in 50 years ago. And if it still bothers your uncle all this time, don't you think Martin James has a right to know about it? No. Gwendraeth slowed to let a milk tanker squeeze past him. Then he put his foot down again. Take it easy, Chief. Gwendraeth ignored his sergeant's warning, and when they reached the main road, he turned left in the direction of Miser Bond. The rain eased, but there was still a damp atmosphere inside the car. Harry Warden reached across and turned the heater on. Don't mind you. Bloody freezing, the sergeant said. Gwendraeth shook his head and put his foot down again. I suppose there's no point in asking you if you want to talk about it. Gwendraeth James shook his head again. At that moment, he was thinking about something Sheila had said 3 weeks or so before she left him. What was it she'd called him that night they'd had the row in the New Indian in Castle Street? Intransigent? Well, he's being intransigent now, wasn't he? He was hardly answering Warden. He was driving too fast. He should do something about it, if he could. No, he said, answering Harry Warden's question after what seemed like a long time. What about you? Well, the sergeant began. He'd obviously had time to think about it. Private lives may be private, as they say, until they come to be a public concern. And I can't help wondering, pardon the expression, if the nookie in the present isn't connected with the conspiracy in the past. Gwendraeth smiled in spite of himself and tried to concentrate on his driving. And by nookie you mean the afternoon shagging between Martin James and Samantha Merriam? Of course. But they're hardly a natural pairing, are they? She's very pretty in her own way. But he's the landlord, isn't he? I mean, she could blot her copybook before he's finished with the handwriting, if you know what I mean. If she screws up, where would all the rest of those Buddhists be? You don't think she's screwed up already? Gwendraeth couldn't resist it. There's no need to be like that, Chief, is there? It was hardly their fault we caught them at it in the middle of the afternoon. Besides, she's upset by the death of her father, that's obvious. And that shooting hardly left him unscathed, did it? What are you saying now exactly? Gwendraeth asked. That two sensitive souls ricocheted off one another and fell accidentally into bed. That's not what you started out to say, is it? Harry Warden wound down the car window to let some air in. That's not what I mean now either, and you know it. They've both got a dead relative, haven't they? Both of whom were probably murdered. So? Are you saying that increases the libido or something? Leave off, Chief. As they approached the outskirts of Miserpont, Harry Warden pointed to an elderly couple who were trying to cross the busy road. Gwendraeth slowed to let them pass and got hooted at by the lorry driver behind him. You know as well as I do that death and sex are often interconnected. You turning pop psychiatrist or something? Of course not. But I wouldn't have to be much of one to tell you that we do have to talk to your uncle about that tape. Now, would I?